My cynicism about the current state of Doctor Who has been well documented at this point, and it's fair to say I've received a certain amount of pushback. One of the most common responses that comes up whenever I call out the show for being what it is, which is a blatant and desperate attempt to recapture its viewership by pandering to nostalgia, is that, oh, well, it was the 60th anniversary, of course they're going to do that. That's the only reason why they brought back David Tennant and Catherine Tate and leaned so heavily into the nostalgia. Never mind the fact that Tennant's Doctor is still kicking about, we'll come back to that, and it's still the same production company running things with Russell T Davies and Ncuti Gatwa at the helm. I can see why it is tempting to dismiss the show's stagnation as just being celebratory anniversary hype, and on a purely superficial level that seems like a reasonable assessment. That is until you scratch beneath the surface and realise that it goes a lot deeper than that. Council of Geeks put out a video not long after the Christmas special where she expressed disappointment at how the RTD2 era is essentially just rehashing the greatest hits, citing the use of the mystery box format with Mrs. Flood and Ruby's Origins in particular as an example of the show retreading familiar tropes and plot devices from the revived era. And my response to that video, and indeed to anyone who is expressing similar frustrations about the state of the show, is, well, yes, but how come you're only just having this realization now? I mean, honestly, when you saw the Whoniverse iconography and the involvement of Disney, plus the fact that it is being made by a company literally called Bad Wolf Productions, what were you really expecting? And to be clear, bringing back a previous team of creators to a franchise is not necessarily a bad thing in itself, but this creative team have demonstrated no intention of bringing anything new to the table or changing things up from what they were doing before. The episode that really confirmed it to me that this is what Doctor Who is going to be now was the Giggle. The finale to the 60th anniversary specials is a complete mess, with way too much going on for any of it to be properly fleshed out or have any real impact. But more importantly, for the sake of this video, it is a very derivative mess. Essentially every component of the Giggle is just RTD1 on steroids, from the over-the-top campy villain to the very on-the-nose political commentary. And yes, for any NMDs who might be watching, the political stuff was always there, even in Davies' original run. I mean, let's not forget about massive weapons of destruction. The one supposedly bold new idea the Giggle does incorporate is the bi-generation, but even that is functionally just a reworking of the Meta-Crisis Doctor from Journey's End, and it totally undermines the tragedy of Donna and Ten's original departure in much the same way that it undermined Rose's. Hell, even the TARDIS being duplicated is a deleted scene from that episode. I was initially hesitant to overly criticise the bi-generation because I didn't want to feel like I was condemning it just for being something new and different, and I blame that paranoia at least partly on Davis's own misleading framing of the discourse in interviews. But the more I think about it, there are legitimate reasons why this is a terrible idea, and it's a classic example of how just because you can do something doesn't necessarily mean you should. For one, it means that Ncuti Gatwa gets completely upstaged in his first appearance as the Doctor, which is really a travesty. It's kind of like when Matt Smith appears at the end of Deep Breath, only much worse, because you know if David Tennant is on screen, that's where the audience's attention is going to be. But the worst part of all is the fact that Tennant is left still kicking around on Earth with Donna at the end of the episode. Sure, the final scene is framed as some sort of ending and closure with the Doctor supposedly getting therapy, although what that therapy actually entails is left rather unclear, but so long as he is still there with a TARDIS, fans are going to be clamouring for him to come back or get his own spin-off series, meaning that spiritually the show can never really close the book and move on from this era. Still, if there's one positive I can say about the Giggle, it's that, unlike with Peter Capaldi in Deep Breath, Ncuti Gatwa comes fully formed as the Doctor, and despite being overshadowed by Tennant, he still manages to make an impression, particularly in the scene where he chucks the 14th Doctor and Donna out of the TARDIS, which I took as a statement that Doctor Who is finally moving forward. But that brings us to the Christmas special, and you know what I said about how the stagnation of the show goes deeper than surface level? Well, this is where that fact is really laid bare. David Tennant and Catherine Tate might be gone, but the mystery boxes and celebrity cameos and Murray Gold's mushy soundtrack are all very much still there. Even the musical number, which admittedly is quite original, is still an extension of the overall camp tone that, as mentioned before, typified much of Davis's original run as showrunner. And to be clear, it's not bad necessarily. The Church on Ruby Road is a decent bit of entertainment for what it is, and Ncuti Gatwa in particular is on top form. He's doing his very best with the material. But it just feels like we're going through the motions. We've seen it all before, and the thought of Doctor Who just doing more of the same stuff it's already done doesn't get me very excited. Say what you like about the Timeless Children, but at least you can't deny that Chris Chibnall had a vision for the show, poorly executed as it might have been. And honestly, I'll take that over Doctor Who being an uninspired, reanimated husk of its former glory, lumbering on fueled by nostalgia. In spite of the somewhat clickbaity thumbnail, I don't necessarily think it's fair to say that Doctor Who has no future. However, I do question whether the show would benefit from being put on hiatus for a few years and coming back reinvigorated with a brand new creative team. It seems unlikely that will happen anytime soon, however, since, ironically, for all that NMDs like to harp on about the viewing figures and try to argue that Doctor Who is dying and that it should therefore be cancelled, in reality the franchise is still very much a household name and a flagship for the BBC, not just in the UK but overseas as well, hence why it is getting the Disney Cinematic Universe treatment in the first place. I want to finish by reiterating once again, if it wasn't clear, that I don't want to be negative about this era of Doctor Who, and for all of my cynicism, part of me was always very keen to hold on to the idea that it was just all anniversary hype. But at this point, if you're expecting RTD2 to really be anything other than a rehash of the greatest hits, then you're the one deluding yourself, and for some of you that might be perfectly fine. But ultimately none of this is going to be remembered, or if it is remembered then it will only be as the lesser version of the thing that was already done better in the 2000s. And that's the reason why, while it might make sense from a corporate point of view, this kind of nostalgia pandering legacy sequel approach is short-sighted and unsustainable. I'm Midnight and I travel in time and space. And trains.